Welcome, Christina, on Dhruva News podcast, and thank you for honoring with your presence. At such short notice, to talk about your experience and being a survivor of 9/11. And it is going to be difficult since the 20th anniversary is approaching, and it's right here tomorrow. Before we start discussing about the day. Can you just tell us about yourself, your background, and your life before 9/11? How was it, and how did it change drastically?
Yes, I'm from the state of Florida, but I moved to New York City when I was 23 years old to see if I could become an actress on the Broadway stage. So I moved to New York and began auditioning, and I did a fair amount of shows, and I enjoyed that career. But at the same time, I became a licensed New York City tour guide. So here in America, a lot of cities, if you want to be a tour guide, I've been to India quite a few times and have taken a lot of tours. And I'm not sure if it's the same, I guess, oversight, but we're required to get a license here and take an exam. So in 1995, I took an exam in New York City to become a licensed New York City tour guide, and I began giving tours of the original World Trade Center site in 1995. And after the attacks, I actually kind of quit the acting business. I had enjoyed it, but to tell you the truth, I lost my confidence after 9/11. I went through so many changes and self-reflection, but I ended up reverting to becoming a licensed tour guide, and I did it all the time, and I still do. But I also started a nonprofit called Loving All Nations. And I started going to India to help with some social justice issues. You know, every country has them. Yeah. Every country has issues and problems. And I have a desire to help out not only in my own country, but in other countries as well, wherever I'm welcome and wherever I can do any good. And so I've been to India quite a few times, Mumbai, Bangalore, and a few other cities, but fell in love with India for sure. I actually, it's funny, can I put something on real quick? Since we're doing it's a podcast in India. Okay. Thank you for your patience. This is my favorite.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is a bit unorthodox, but
No, it's fine. Okay, the shawl. Yes. The traditional. Yeah.
I just must. Thank you. Yeah. But at any rate, but I digress. So so now I run a nonprofit with my husband. We've had that for, I think, 5 years. I'm a licensed New York City tour guide, and I'm also a writer. So I write a lot of articles about social justice causes. And right now, of course, I have a lot of articles that have come out about 9/11. But a lot of everything, well, not a lot of, but everything I do nowadays has their roots in 9/11, meaning everything that kind of populates my world, from activities to people to where I'm at, what I do, all my roads lead back to 9/11, and my husband's the same way.
So most of the experience is painful for everyone after 9/11, and keeping a very positive outlook. How is that the difference in you? Like, being so positive, even after being a survivor and after seeing the WTC before the attacks, how was that experience when you used to take the tour through the WTC? How is the reaction of the people, and how is the building? Can you just tell us a little bit about your day, those early days?
I will. I will say that when you mentioned attitude, life is, everything is how you look at it. And I know that sounds a little cliched, but life is never going to be smooth. And in fact, it's very obvious it's going to be a struggle, and it's a struggle for everybody in different ways. It's a struggle for all of us now, collectively, because of the pandemic. But you have to overcome or not, and you choose what you're going to do and how you're going to deal with something. And I know I'm a person who looks for meaning and a lot of life's lessons and the good times and the bad times of life. But I looked for meaning after 9/11, and I wanted to have some purposeful takeaways, because I felt like I'm 31 and that was a horrible, horrible thing. And I need to make sure my life is following something that's purposeful and meaning for me, because it might be a shorter life, you know, looking at 9/11, because in 9/11, I really thought that I was going to die. So I just am a person who looks for meaning, but I also want to have each day be purposeful and to accomplish things that will help others, because, you know, life is short, you know. But when it comes to that day, my husband and I actually were newlyweds. I was 31, he was 35. We had just moved into our, let's call it a newlywed apartment, and it turned out to be 6 blocks away from the Twin Towers. And we had this wonderful apartment on the 24th floor that had a 300 square foot terrace. So just a small terrace, but, you know, outdoor spaces, probably just like Mumbai, it's not so easy to come by. Yes. And they're prized. Everybody loves being outside and having their own little space to call their own in an outside manner. And so I was so excited about this apartment, but our things were still in boxes that morning. And my husband came and shook me awake and said, something's happened. We must go onto the terrace and see what's going on. Because when that first plane hit the North Tower, it actually shook our building. So my husband knew something horrible had just happened. So on our terrace, we could see flames and smoke coming out of the North Tower, and we didn't know what had happened. We also heard a lot of noise coming from the street. Now, normally we don't hear a lot of noise. We were so far up, but there was so much collective screaming and sirens going off that I was overcome by how noisy it was and the terrible scene of the North Tower burning. When all of a sudden, over my right-hand shoulder, the second plane came and went over our heads, went in front of us, turned, and went into the South Tower. And the shock waves of that plane hitting the South Tower actually blew us back into our apartment. And the good news about that was we had kept our terrace doors open, or we might have been hurt much badly. But I came to on the floor of my living room, and I came to with my dog jumping on me. And he's actually what woke me up. But my husband was yelling different things. And at one point I heard him asking if I wanted my shoes. I popped up in a panic and ran for the stairs. So when I was running down, he grabbed our dog and ran down behind me. But when I got outside and finished running out of the 24 flights, I realized I was wearing pajamas and I didn't have any shoes. Which is, I mean, imagine, you know, walking through the streets of Mumbai. It's crazy. It's a crazy idea. You step on all kind of crazy things. Yeah. But even in that amount of time, they wouldn't let us back into our apartment because they said, well, it's evacuation only. And, you know, I took off, my husband took off his socks. I wore his socks. And I felt, well, nobody cares what I'm wearing. I saw a lot of people also in their pajamas, yes, and crying and bloody and their clothing shredded. Everybody was kind of locked into their own horror. But we evacuated to Battery Park, which is a nearby 25-acre park at the very southern tip of Manhattan. And that's where we were when the Twin Towers fell. And it covered us with dust and debris and surrounded us by smoke. We thought we were going to be asphyxiated. We couldn't breathe. My husband and I said goodbye to each other. And it was a terrible, dramatic scene. And there was thousands of people running around Battery Park who also thought it was their last moments on Earth. And it was a very sad goodbye. I was hoping that the very end would be very quick, but it was sad. I felt I had just started out life. I had just gotten married. We had just gotten our dog, and life seemed like it was going to be wonderful for us. And instead, we were facing death, and it was terrible. We were rescued off the island in a boat, and we didn't get back into our apartment for 2 more weeks after that because there's several reasons, but mainly because we lived too close to the attack zone. But once we got back, it still wasn't easy for us. You know, we started suffering from PTSD. Our dog hovered between life and death for weeks because he had licked the dust off his fur, which contained ground up glass, which shredded his insides. And my husband found out a good friend of his died in the North Tower. And it just, we were unemployed. The attacks left us unemployed. And so it did seem that the world was still falling down. And of course, we were all very upset about the almost 3,000 people who died. And it felt that the world became a very scary, dark, and unjust place for many of us who didn't previously hold those beliefs. We thought life was happy and fun and the sky's the limit, and all of a sudden it wasn't fun anymore, and it was dark and scary and death and murderous. So it was a tough time.
Right. So you have written the award-winning book Out of the Shadow of 9/11, which won the 2020 Benjamin Franklin Award and the
Yes.
Independent Publisher Book Award. So
I do think it's sold in India. I do think so.
Okay, right. So I would like to ask, what is different about this book? Like, there are plethora of books on the same subject, and there are lots of survivors and lots of eyewitnesses. So how is your book different from them?
You know, it was interesting because when I approached a publisher and I had said I'd written a book, I started writing this book 15 years after the attacks, which is a long time. And he looked at me and he said, Christina, 700 books have been written about 9/11. And I said, well, I know about those books. I've looked at those books. They're all about terrorists and terrorism, the architecture of the World Trade Center site, the towers and the planes. Mine is a different perspective. And he said, Christina, no one wants to hear your perspective unless you were in the towers. Okay. And I remember thinking, he's actually wrong. And I knew he was wrong. And I knew he was wrong primarily from being a tour guide, because I take thousands of tourists around the World Trade Center site and the memorial and the museum, and I'll tell them my personal story. I tell them about the boat evacuation. I tell them what it was like to be one of the 25,000 residents that lived near the attack zone and all the things that we faced. They're surprised to learn that animals like pets died. And I call this a ripple effect, right? So there was thousands of people who suffered ripple effects from the attacks, whereas a lot of Americans think that the damage and destruction happened within the 16 acres that comprise the World Trade Center. Us in New York, we all know that it affected thousands more lives, and people were dying of cancers, you know, of the dust inhalation. I mean, it's an ongoing saga. And so as a tour guide who tours thousands of people per year ever since the attacks and before the attacks, I knew what people kind of knew and didn't know about 9/11. And so I decided to create a book from the perspective of a resident of the neighborhood in which the attacks took place as a ripple effect, just to show that the attacks had a far bigger effect than what people, I think, the opinions that people genuinely hold. And it's not like my book is going to all of a sudden make light bulbs go off, right? And of course, the people in the planes and the towers, those are very important stories, and it doesn't take anything away from that. What it does is it adds to people's understanding of that day and gives them a much larger scope, which was the effect of the attacks. It had a very large scope and it had a lot of ripple effects. And I just hope that it helps to complete or broaden people's understanding of that day.
Right. So could you read us a short extract from your book? A short paragraph, if you wish, for the viewers.
Me?
Yes.
That's difficult to do because it's very upsetting. Let's see. Yes. So let's see. Every time I tried to take a deep breath, I inhaled soot and the sickening scent of burning electrical wiring. I couldn't block out the shrieks and the cries of people who believed that they were about to die. And I couldn't ignore the people running aimlessly all around me. As far as I could see, Brian and I were the only ones standing still. We turned toward each other. I searched his Facebook, couldn't tell what he was thinking. Nothing in our 18 months of marriage had prepared us for this madness. Brian, is this it? Are we going to die? He hesitated and then looked me in the eye. I don't know. Maybe, he said. sadly. As we stood there in the shadow of the fort, Brian took my hands and began praying out loud. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. As he recited the Lord's Prayer, I began my own silent entreaty. Lord, I'm sorry I've been spending lots of time doing life without you, and I haven't been serious in my relationship with you. I'm sorry that I wasn't a better daughter to my mother. Please forgive my anger and stubbornness. I'm sorry I've held grudges. I looked up as Brian continued to pray, and gratitude replaced my fears. Well, Brian and I will be together whatever happens. And God, you gave me such a wonderful gift with this awesome man. I opened my eyes. My dream city was now a hellscape. Yeah.
Very interesting and intriguing, and it's a very personal perspective, since you are showing your flaws as well in that little paragraphs.
Yes.
And I believe that changed you as a person, since you said that 9/11 has been always in your thoughts ever since, and that is why you have formed the lovingallnations.org. So how does that come in, and what work do you do through your organization? How do you help people through it?
So primarily when it comes to my organization, since we were homeless for the couple of weeks that we were after 9/11, I had never had that experience of being homeless, and I found it very tough and dehumanizing. Ever since then, I've really cared a lot about homeless and refugees. So my nonprofit helps those communities where they live and need help. But we work with a lot of, let's say, if we were to help India or South Africa, we already have hosts in place who I know very well and who help to care for their own communities. So really, a lot of Americans don't like to give money to organizations unless they can get a tax receipt, and unless the organizations have been vetted, like they know that they're doing good things. So we do both. In mine, we give tax receipts to Americans, but we've also personally gone and seen the good work that organizations are doing, that they really help communities, and they help the most underserved in the communities. A lot of people, when they're really hurting, it's hard for them to even get noticed, some groups. And so we try to help the least of these, I guess, or the people who have the hardest time getting noticed in their pain. So, but we've had that for 5 years, and it does really well. I love our partners, but it's all about partnerships and making friendships with organizations truly not in it for themselves in any way, but really out there to help their communities. But all of that comes from feeling like people helped me after 9/11, and they did. So, we had people open up their apartments to us to stay in, complete strangers. And who does that, right?
Right.
But we had literally complete strangers open their apartments to us. We went to Salvation Armies and Goodwills and places where people dropped off donations. And we got clothing and toiletries and food from these places, of course, for free, which I so appreciate. I appreciate the organizations, but I also appreciate the people who donated the items so we could have them. Yes. But we were people who had needs after 9/11, and people rushed over to help us. When I was walking around New York City, I would see queues for a mile. And for people who were dropping off donations, for people who were queuing up to give blood, they thought that the blood was needed. It turns out so much blood was given. They told people to stop and to go back home because they had everything they needed. But people really stepped up to the plate, and it was the kindnesses that people showed us that left a huge impression, and I never forgot it. And I wanted to help be part of a kindness that is shown to other people who are in a bad way.
Right. So, Christina, before we can sign off and say goodbye, what is your last message to the viewers and the listeners? And where can we find your book? Is it online on bookstores so that they can, get it and read it? Could you give us some information regarding that?
Yeah, I'm almost positive this is sold in India. So look on your version of Amazon or wherever you all do online, because it is sold all over the world. And all the proceeds from the book don't go to me. It all goes to my nonprofit, which I love, because it makes me feel that, again, 9/11 has come full circle for me, that people helped me, and through it, I can help others. And I feel like it helps complete the circle of giving and paying it forward, which is what people, again, did for me. So, but if I were to leave anything, any thoughts, when it comes to 9/11, and I look back and think, I remember the 3,000 people that were lost that day, but I also think of all the heroes that rose up to try to help their fellow man. Because let me tell you, there was a lot of rescue workers who were there to try to save people, but normal civilians rose up within the towers and outside the towers to help people in their time of need. And the hero stories that come out of 9/11 are literally overwhelming. As many stories of those who have passed, there are as many stories of people who tried to help others. And it doesn't diminish the lives who are cut short far too quick. But there's two ways to look at it. Again, we honor those who died. We remember those who rose up to help. And there's nothing like showing kindness to others, especially in this day and age with the pandemic. I know this sounds crazy, but of all the people who helped us after 9/11, do you know who I remember a lot?
Mm-hmm.
When we were dropped off in New Jersey after the boat left, I needed to use the bathroom. To tell you the truth, I needed to use the loo, right? But I didn't even know where we were. I was in my pajamas, completely yellow, completely covered with dust, filthy, probably stink. So my husband and my dog did as well. And I was wearing socks, walking over train tracks. And all I needed was a bathroom, and I couldn't find anything. Some woman saw me in my distress and invited us in, complete strangers, completely filthy, and just used the restroom. We had a lot of people help us that day and afterwards, but it was just somebody offering their loo to me that 20 years later, it's the smallest act of kindness when I needed it most. And that's something that we can all give each other.
Right. So thank you so much, Christina, for being on Dhruv News podcast show. And I'm glad you gave me the time and I can share this wonderful story of yours through our platform. Thank you so much for being my guest. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you. Hey, India. Miss you, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.